Hey, good afternoon, folks. This is Craig Berstatti, the Acting Director for the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship here at EDA. Thanks so much for joining us. As you probably have gotten to know, this is a tough competition. There is a lot of work that goes into it, and both on our end as well as yours. And we want to respect your effort that you put forward and give you as much information as we can to hopefully educate you a little bit more about the program at large, and also maybe a little bit more in depth too on some of the strategies we were looking for with respect to regional innovation. So, but we'll get into those details in a bit, and just a couple points that I wanted to highlight before we dig into the broader conversation. One, for those that are coming to this webinar as maybe first exposure to the program, this might be a little technical for you, or if you supervise or are the director of a program and might not be as involved in the day-to-day of the grant applications, similarly, this might not be as valuable. But for those of you on the line that wrote an application, submitted it, worked with us throughout the process, or one of our regional reps across the nation, you'll likely find that some of the key trends we'll discuss here will really resonate with you, since you really understand some of the ins and outs of the program. Moving forward, you know, in future rounds, we'll certainly continue our historical outreach, and we'll have kickoff webinars and informational sessions later in 2018 for future rounds. But again, this is going to be a little technical and really focused on last year's nuances. Second, this is being recorded, and we hope that this is going to be informational for you today and in the future. We'll have it on our website. This will be available, so don't be shy. Feel free to download it, share it with your program leadership, your colleagues across your communities who might want to collaborate in future rounds. Please feel free. And lastly, we will not be able to get to questions in a real-time basis today. We do encourage you to drop them into the text box. We might be able to address some of them through clarifying comments as those subjects come up, and making sure that our remarks are meaningful to you. But frankly, given the nuances and the details of everyone's application, we just can't get to every question immediately. But we'll be sure to address those as best as possible in our future funding opportunity, in the NOFAs themselves, the Notice of Funding Opportunities, as well as our frequently asked questions and other resources that we prepare. So please, if you got a burning question, make sure we hear it, and we'll do our best to address it. So with that being said, today's agenda, running right through in order from top to bottom, pretty straightforward. You know, I mentioned where we're calling in from headquarters here in DC. Eric Smith with me and Andrea Fasanich. But our regional reps, Chris Rice down in Austin, Texas, Brian Parker in Seattle, Zach Graves in Denver, Greg Becker in our Chicago region, Shiva Scranum in Philadelphia, and Robin Cooley in Atlanta. They're right there. We'll get you their points of contact, but it is a big team here at headquarters. We help steer general policy issues for the Department of Commerce and, of course, EDA with respect to innovation and entrepreneurship, and oversee this program as part of that portfolio. But our real doers and experts in the field are going to be those members you see, those team members right there on the map. So get to know them if you haven't. Hopefully you've engaged them over this past year, or maybe have a long-standing relationship with us. And again, we'll have the contacts up later. So at a high level, this is a simple way that we like to look at a community's economic development state. This is a nod to Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs, a famed psychologist who came to fame during the late 40s, early 50s, with the self-actualization of an individual. We see the same strategy can be applied to a community, where how does a community become self-actualized and realize their full unique potential? Starting at the very bottom, where it would be your physiological needs if you were an individual. Well, here it's your basic infrastructure, those physical needs, moving on up top. For this program, pretty straightforward. We know where risk falls, the regional innovation strategies. We're looking to support activities in those on that innovation engine and business support level. But oftentimes those activities might need specific improvements or construction done, going all the way down to infrastructure, whether it's new power grid, roads, some technical assistance with strategic evaluations and studies. And my point today on this slide is that we EDA, our broader programming, can support nearly any activity across this continuum, or across this hierarchy here. So our public works grants, if you're not familiar, do some great support in construction and right there, that sweet spot of basic infrastructure. Our planning grants can also help with that as well. If you're trying to plan out a large build, maybe an innovation district or a science and research park for this group, or you're trying to evaluate a strategy to scale a program across a broader part of the state or tri-state area, for instance. That's where our technical assistance and planning grants can come into play. Bottom line, I think this is a unique value proposition for our agency. We're very flexible. We have a number of programs that can support across the continuum. And with respect to an ecosystem and how we're looking at it with on the entrepreneurship and business formation front, these are some of the standard ingredients we like to refer to and see in a strategic vision, your plans, and this naturally how our grants, our investments are going to move specific targeted pieces of those forward. Again, this is going to be downloadable. Use it as a resource. Hope it will be helpful for not just you, but your colleagues across your region. So to dive into our programs is going to be our senior policy advisor, no better person than Eric Smith. Eric.
Thanks, Greg. So just to give some specifics about the RISK program for those of you on the line who are a little less familiar with it. The RISK program funding is divided up into two streams. One's the I6 challenge. So this really focuses on proof of concept and commercialization activities, everything from incubators and accelerators to mentor networks and technology proof of concept activities. And then the other stream is the seed fund support grant competition, where the funding is aimed to support operations and formation to result in the creation or expansion of early stage equity-based capital funds, particularly in regions or sectors or ecosystems where there's not a lot of that early stage funding available for startups. Couple of specifics, I6 challenge, we have a $500,000 federal funds cap. 1-to-1 match is required, so every federal dollar needs at least $1 from private, state, and local partners, non-federal funds generally. For the seed fund support grant, it's a $300,000 funds cap, same 1-to-1 match, and for both of those competitions, we start with a 3-year project period. Just to give a little bit of an idea of the competitiveness of this program, you can see that in the last 4 funding cycles, we've gotten nearly 850 applications, but have made about 140 grants. So that being said, this is a really competitive grant competition, and we have a lot of you who are on the line who may have applied and were not awarded, but that's not to say you didn't have a great application. That's just that there are a lot of great applications that we do receive. So, you know, don't put that work to waste. Make sure that you're looking forward to future funding opportunities and evolving and iterating on those project proposals that you've developed. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Andrea to talk about the grant process.
Thanks, Eric. So as Eric mentioned, a lot of you on the line have been through the process, and we think it's really helpful to just give you a high-level overview on how we exactly go about reviewing your applications. As you can see, it's kind of a four-step process. You submit your application, we do a technical review, a merit review, and then selection. And I'll go into a little bit more detail in the next slide. And I also just want to highlight in each section or each stage kind of a pain point or a few pain points that we've seen applicants have in the past. So the first one is the actual submission. This year less than in previous years, but applicants have had some difficulties making sure that their SAM registration was up to date, and that has in the past prevented them from submitting their application. So if you're planning on applying again, just make sure that you've, your SAM registration is up to date and that you've created a grants.gov account. And this is important also because these two, both the SAM and the grants.gov, are used for all federal grants. So it's not just EDA specific. If you're planning on applying to any federal grants, you need to have these two accounts in place. And then I won't go into details, but I will highlight that the process from getting your DUNS to registering in SAM to getting the grants.gov account can sometimes take up to 30 days. So please start early in this process. The next step is technical review. So basically what we do is we take all the applications and we make sure that all the documentation is there in place before it moves on to being reviewed for its merit. This is really important. I'm just going to highlight one particular part of the technical review that a few applications have gotten knocked out for, and that's the match. And Eric mentioned that earlier, that we do have a one-to-one match. And so what that means is that if you're requesting $500,000 of federal funding, then your match requirement is also $500,000. And we've had quite a few applicants that got knocked out during technical for not coming up with match, or for not providing the commitment letters. This is really important. It should be from either your organization or a co-applicant, or possibly if you have a third-party organization that's providing some kind of in-kind or cash match, make sure that you have the letters supporting that. Two resources that I just want to point out very quickly is that in the NOFA, we do have checklists, depending on what type of organization you are. They're really, really great, so please use those. And then the other tool that we have to make sure that your application passes technical review is that we have this optional pre-submission technical review. And basically what you do is you put your application together, and 2 weeks before you need to submit or before the NOFA closes, you can submit your entire application to one of our awesome risk reps, and they'll actually go through and let you know if you have all your ducks in a row, all your T's crossed and I's dotted. So I think that that's really helpful. Keep that in mind for next round. The next section is merit review. So each one of your applications, if it passed technical review and made it to merit review, it was reviewed by at least 3 federal employees. Our reviewers come from a bunch of different agencies and bureaus and have a diverse expertise in a bunch of different fields related to innovation and entrepreneurship. One thing that I want to highlight here is that in the NOFA, we actually provide the criteria that each one of those reviewers uses to evaluate and score your applications. This is really important, and we'll dig into that a little bit more in the next 6 slides. And then the last part of the process is once those merit reviewers have submitted their individual scores, the grants officer gets that list and he makes the final determination on the awards. And with that, like I mentioned, we're going to be going through the 6 review criteria, and they were in the NOFA, really important, and I'll let Craig go for the first two.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. Before we get into that, I'll just add a couple areas of emphasis. You know, what Andrea just went through might have seemed a bit technical, but just simply put, we wouldn't put it out there if we didn't see it every year. So sadly, there might be you know, a great organization that just doesn't get their SAM registration in on time, or has been registered for a long time, but at the end of the application cycle realizes that it hasn't been renewed recently. So small things like that will catch you up. Use these slides as a resource. Pretty straightforward, but the emphasis is this is a federal grant program, and the only way we can vet organizations is through the applications we have. So we take it very seriously, and we have a zero flex on some of these policies. So making sure you're eligible, you've got the right documentation in play, and then we can get to this the next piece here, which is our first piece of review criteria. You know, and as I like to say it, many of you are great practitioners in the field, and you know that entrepreneurship, innovation is absolutely a contact sport. So we are looking for a strong, connected team to move these ideas into the market. With that being said, it is always preferred to have quality over quantity. You know, I think anecdotally we see some applications that are trying to move everyone and their brother and sister into the program's direction or support, whether it's support letters or partnerships. You know, while that can be fantastic, let's also be cognizant that those relationships and those partnerships are manageable, and it is truly a value add to all organizations. And the direction of that particular industry cluster or program is clearly stated, and there's the right community leaders are behind it. So again, quality over quantity, and you know, there is a solid long-term strategy behind those relationships. Pretty straightforward here. Again, these slides are all going to be available to download later. With that, you know, making sure your team is diverse too, right? Innovations might take a dozen or 24 iterations before they're really ready for market and scale. So thus, diversity of thought is required, and we believe inclusion and diversity is a key aspect, and making sure that there's collaboration across the ecosystem. Part of that is because EDA, we view our role, we have a small budget. We view ourselves as a early stage investor that is going to kickstart momentum and energy at a much larger scale. So too narrowly focused or not the right type of outreach might not be the right type of investment for our small bucket of funds. We want to come into, you know, our funds, excuse me, our funds are best used and leveraged when we can pull together multiple stakeholders to reach a broad set of communities, demographics, you name it. So please be clear on how that plan is going to come to fruition. Be strategic about those partners and realistic as well. So up next, Eric's gonna cover down on the economic and job impacts.
Thanks, Greg. So this is one area where we see a lot of variance, and there are certainly a lot of different ways to do this. But one thing we're looking for when we're making the decisions about where to invest the funds and when our reviewers are looking at applications is they're very concerned about what your estimated impacts are. They want to ensure that not only do you have a reasonable and fact and data-based estimate, but also that you've got a method to track progress against those estimates and against those milestones throughout the life of the project and beyond. We look at ourselves, like Craig said earlier, like early stage investors in a lot of ways, but our ROI is economic dynamism in the form of GDP growth, job growth, business formation, along a number of different metrics. But that's the returns that we're looking for in our early stage catalytic investments, and we want to make sure that the grantees that are getting these funds are cognizant of that and have a good plan to account for that over the life of the grant. Like the key takeaway here says, evidence-based approaches are compelling. Make sure you've got some analysis and some data behind your estimated impacts and how you're going to continue to measure those throughout the term of the project. The other thing that we like to focus on here, or another thing we like to focus on here at EDA is strengths-based economic development. So one of the things that our reviewers take a look at is the assets and infrastructure in your cluster. The Regional Innovation Strategies Program and the statute that's behind it, the theory really is to invest in regional innovation clusters. So these funds are not meant to start a brand new industry from scratch in your region. They're looking to leverage the strengths of the region and to further connect ecosystems, rural, urban, in between, at all levels of economic development, so that new firms can be created in those industry clusters and create that economic dynamism that we're looking for. So one of the things that's really important here is showing what those assets and showing what that infrastructure is in the region, and making it very clear how those are related to the project that you're proposing and the impacts that you're looking to get. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Andrea for the last two.
So the next second to last criteria that we looked at is sustainability and adaptability. I think that with a lot of applications, this section may be a bit overlooked, and I know that it's something that our reviewers and our team is very interested in. As Eric mentioned, we do look at this as making long-term investments, and we like to see projects that have a long-term vision. Some parts that we see in applications that demonstrate to us that they're strong proposals is plans to diversify their funding streams, concrete commitments for future financial support, and just overall the adaptability, the ability to look and realize what type of risks that their program could have in the future and how they plan to mitigate those risks going forward. So like I said, this is something that sustainability and adaptability is huge. So please, when you're putting together your proposal, really take a long look at this and come up with a plan that's reasonable and shows that this is something that you plan to be providing the service to the region going forward and even after the grant is done. And then the last criteria is project feasibility. So this has a lot to do with what type of deliverables you will be providing. Reviewers like to understand, they should walk away after reading this section of your application understanding what your project deliverables are, when you plan to meet those deliverables, what type of staff is going to be working on this project, and all of that should also correlate with your budget narrative, which is really important. And we saw across the board in some applications issues where with the budget or some kind of misalignment. So just make sure that you take a look at that when you are putting together your next proposal. And with that, I will hand it actually back to Eric, and he'll just go through some of the top recommendations that we have for you going forward.
Yeah, so I can't emphasize number one enough. Become really familiar with the federal funding opportunity, the Notice of Funding Availability. This is the Bible, the kind of baseline document on which everything is based. That's where all the scoring criteria are laid out. And one thing we did this year to make it a little more user-friendly for you and for our reviewers is to really spell out in more detail how each of those criteria are going to be evaluated. So you can see in the document kind of the levels at each one of the scoring criteria that you're going to be scored, and you can see how we're evaluating that a little more transparently. One thing that, you know, a lot of these we talked about kind of over the course of the last few slides, but really clear and concise is key. We get a ton of these applications, and like I said earlier, many of these are really very good, very compelling, but the clearer and the more concise you can be in that project narrative, the better we're going to be able to understand what you're proposing and how it aligns with those criteria. As Craig mentioned earlier, you know, a diverse set of organizations is really key. We're talking about regional innovation clusters. This is strengths-based and collaboration-focused economic development. You know, barring some unique circumstances in places where there just really aren't, there's not a really robust set of organizations doing this work that showing that collaboration amongst all the players in the ecosystems that are serving kind of a number of different stakeholders is really important. Peer review always helps. Like Andrea said, start as early as possible, and the more you can have your peer organizations review that application, the better, the clearer it's going to get, and the more potential pitfalls you're going to be able to identify and avoid. And to reiterate the start early and submit early, there are both advantages to that from forming your collaborations and putting together the proposal and making sure you have time to iterate on it to make it as clear and concise and as compelling as possible, but also just to get through a lot of the technical requirements. As Craig mentioned, this is a federal grant program, and there's a little bit of process that goes along with that. So, you know, we acknowledge that and are just trying to give you a heads up that the earlier you can start on that process, the earlier you can meet those technical requirements, the smoother the whole process is going to go. Let me just talk for a minute about FY18. As some of you may know, Congress hasn't passed the full year budget yet, so we're still waiting to see what our appropriations are going to be, what the total amount of funding is going to be. But pending that appropriation, we're planning on announcing another round of the funding. So keep an eye out for that. And the best two ways to do that are to sign up for email alerts on grants.gov and to sign up for EDA's monthly newsletter where we will make that announcement. There's also social media that you can access as well from EDA that might be helpful in that regard. So with that, I'll hand it back to Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So we've got a couple quick but simple questions I think are important to address on today's call. Some are a little more technical, and we'll save those for later. But first off, there was a question about the grants officer. Where does that role lie, and kind of maybe the process and referrals from the merit review onto the grants officer? Well, actually, I'll say full disclosure, I was the grants officer this past year. So I say this with some authority that the reviews that move forward to the grants officer, there's some pretty clear and transparent steps with respect to ensuring programmatic geographic diversity. But for the most part, top scoring applications do move forward and are awarded, except for the case if there's like I said, programmatic or geographic concentration, and we need some diversity there. So that helps me answer my next point, which there was a question around regional reps and engaging them, and will that help prepare you better or give you a leg up? I can't remember the exact question, but you know, reason why we want you to engage our regional reps is, number one, so you can better understand the program and really what we're looking for. There's no better tool than a live person. Two, they are true experts in the field, and they know many of the players from an industry leadership perspective, foundations, other economic development organizations in your region, and can make referrals. They can strengthen your application sometimes by helping connect you with other like-minded partners who can elevate maybe a small idea to a big catalytic idea. So there is no requirement, though. Let me emphasize that. There's no requirement for you to meet with our regional reps in preparation of your application, nor will it make you a favored applicant. This is a truly national competition. All applications are reviewed thoroughly and with the same treatment. So they are purely there for a resource and to better inform you about the program and the activities across the region. You know, Eric touched on the time frame a little bit. We're expecting, you know, around in 2018. I know there was some concern around a shorter application period. That's why we want to emphasize get started now. We're not sure exactly when we'll have the ability to roll out a new funding opportunity in 2018, but I can promise you we will do our best to ensure that it is the time window or the time frame is as favorable as possible for you all. But with that being said, we expect very similar. We expect the funding opportunity to look very similar to prior years, and you've got the historical information on our webpage, this webinar. So get started now. I really encourage you to do that. And last but not least, a good question on job creation and impact metrics. Look, we realize, and going back to that hierarchy of needs, that triangle, that pyramid that I presented earlier, every community is a little different. Every community is in a different state of entrepreneurship, innovation-based economic development. And sometimes that means 10 jobs in one community might be more compelling than 100 jobs in another. So we look for impacts relative to your region and hope that you are able to communicate, and not hope, but rely on you all to communicate those gaps and opportunities in your application. So with that, you know, maybe my best closing remark is that treat this application just as you would maybe coach or mentor some of your innovators and entrepreneurs. What is your gap? What's the problem you're trying to solve? And pitch us the solution. If your community really, really needs 10 jobs, that's going to be a compelling argument, I'll bet, for us. Just make sure you explain the theory and evidence base behind it. So, guys, anything else we should cover at this point?
No.
No.
All right. It's going online. Any other?
Yep, so we're recording the webinar. We'll make sure to put it up on the website, and I actually have the list of everyone's emails, so I can send it out via email as well.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thanks.